couple of things. First of all, what the planners are talking about, are they planning to win the war? No. They're using air power. Air power is not going to win a war. Shock and awe is for the media. Shock and awe. Oh my goodness, look at the power. Right? One of the reporters from Stars and Stripes said it's like a sledgehammer hitting a floating corpse. Right? You can hit it as hard as you want, but it's going to pop up somewhere else because there's nothing that we're hitting that can't be relatively easily replaced. Number two is that it's going to unite the North in regards to opposition to the United States. That's what happened in World War II. It's going to happen again. And lastly, what Westmoreland says is that if our strategy is to use simply air power and not American troops, we've got to have American troops in the ground simply to protect that air power, right? That's escalation, right? By contrast, you could make an argument that says we are going to occupy Vietnam, we're going to send 1.5 million American troops and occupy this country until it is pacified, right? That's World War II. That ain't Vietnam. That's not these kinds of little steps, etc. That in terms of the approach that's going to be taken here. The Joint Chiefs said it would take only 12 days to pacify the North. And needless to say, we're in the country for almost 7 years. Johnson is fearful, as I mentioned, about escalating this. And in his own biography, and Doris Kearns Goodwin kind of said, bombing represented the moderate path between competitive extremes of massive destruction and total withdrawal. And the middle road is not a road you're going to take if you are intending to win a war. Right? That is not a way, it's not an argument to say this is why I'm going to put your loved one on the front lines to fight this war. What are you fighting for? How about a draw? How about the hearts and minds? Right? That is not an effective reason to put someone, an American citizen, in harm's way in regards to that. Certainly an argument to be made.
So what was the objective?
The objective was to put pressure on the North Vietnamese and that internally it would collapse or go to the negotiating table, right? Effectively what they wanted to do was to keep the foundation of the South Vietnamese country supported, that it won't go away. So the North wants to unite, the South wants to stay separate, right, according to American policy. So the idea was to maintain that separateness. The problem is that if you're saying to the South Vietnamese, don't worry, we're gonna fight this war, what are you going to do? Stand back and go get it, right? Go get them, Yankees, right? We're going to have the same problem we're going to see in Iraq and certainly in Afghanistan, is that suddenly the American and their allies are suddenly in the front of this thing, and it's not by design. That's the problem, right? NSC 68 kind of is by design. So there are a lot of myths of the war, and I want to make sure and underscore these are not true. Right? The number one is that we lost on the battlefield, particularly if there was a sense that there wasn't enough military commitment. Put into context, when we start to get to U.S. in the Middle East, we send in at the high point of American occupation of Iraq. There are 160,000 troops there, right? In 2006, 160,000 troops in a country that is 3 times larger than Vietnam. By 1967, there are 500,000 American fighters in country. This is not we didn't, Rambo, we get to win this time. We drop more bombs on a non-industrial country than we do throughout all of World War II, right? It is not a question, our troops are better trained, our troops are better equipped, our troops are better led. Every time they engage in a stand-up engagement with the North Vietnamese, the United States wins those engagements. And so it's not a question of losing on the battlefield. It's a question of what are we winning? Right? What is it that what's the objective? Right? And when we get to the end of this, there is a real reconsideration on the part of the Joint Chiefs of Staff about here's what America needs to do if we're going to say to an American citizen, don't fight and put your life on the line. There has to be some really legitimate goals, and the American public needs to be engaged in. We don't stumble into this war, and what I hope to try and stress is that these are very clear objection or goals on the part of first Eisenhower, and then Kennedy, and then Johnson, and later Nixon and Ford. Right? These are political goals. These are not military goals. Right? And equally incorrect is that the United States kills or goes after population centers. They do not. Right? You want to see baby killing schemes? Go back to the Good War, where we lit Tokyo on fire, where we leveled Hiroshima. Those are civilian deaths. We do not do that in this war. There are going to be instances where you have individual examples of sort of war atrocities or war crimes, but they are not the policy nor They're not doing what Vladimir Putin is doing right now in Ukraine. They're not just indiscriminately bombing rural locations. They're trying, in essence, to use bombing as a way in which to force politically a situation. But the strategic problems of the United States are massive here. It's very similar to the American Civil War. All the South had to do in the Civil War was to survive. All it had to do was to keep flying that battle flag and saying, we're still here. That is an easier proposal than saying, we're going to make you disappear. The borders around Vietnam, we are going to be kind of required to stay within the concrete borders of Vietnam. The opposition is not. And much of the supply routes are going to start going through places like Cambodia and Laos, countries that are not involved in this war. And the Army of the Republic of Vietnam, as I mentioned, is going to see that the initiative is being taken by the Americans. Why the hell should they put themselves at risk? Right? If the United States is willing to do all the fighting, go get them. Right? I have no interest in doing that myself. Here's the dereliction of duty. This was evident to Johnson. This was evident to Kennedy. This was evident. I mean, his own, you heard it yourself, we're saying, we don't have a victory plan here. We don't know how we're supposed to win this thing. The generals themselves are saying, what we can do is bomb them back to the Stone Age, but whether or not that's going to achieve anything is a different question entirely. They knew this in '65, and they did not, right? And not necessarily telling the truth to the United States may not be, in your definition, lying to the United States, regardless. The point is moot. Is that most of the scholarship right now is kind of very clearly showing that Congress, the military, the politicians see this as a political opportunity. And if there's a more damnable reason, you know, for someone to be held accountable is to say, well, your life, I'm going to use your life to make sure I win the next election. Again, you know, your results may vary. What begins to start to emerge in a public reckoning of this war is that the United States becomes increasingly responsible for civilian deaths. And as I mentioned before, this is not the formal policy, but you do see incidences. You do see this, you know, famously, we had to destroy the village to save the village. The idea of burning out traditional locations that haven't relocated according to American policies. This picture down here, they're recovering bodies from an accidental bombing of a missionary, a Lutheran mission in North Vietnam. So these are not intentional, but they are a product of war. War is confusing. War, you know, what usually happens if you're bombing is that if these bombs drop when the mechanism drops as it's supposed to, everything's great. If they hang on the racks at all, if they're slow to deliver, slow to roll off the racks on the plane, you're going to drop these bombs 100 yards, 200 yards, a mile further from where you intended to do them. Right? So air campaigns are not bloodless. They're not accident-free. They're very expensive. This number on the bottom sort of kind of tells it all when we get to Johnson's domestic policies. For every person in poverty, the United States during the Johnson years is going to spend $50. For every enemy killed in Vietnam, we're going to spend $250,000. Wars are expensive. Wars are going to put a burden on the American economy that, again, are not being paid by taxes. They're not being asked to raise taxes. They're not being asked to sacrifice. They're not being asked to cut back on oil and gas consumption or whatnot. Right? So this expense doesn't just disappear. Right? If it's your personal expense, right, it's like, well, I spend a lot of money out here. There are squeezes. There are things that are going to take place as a result of that. Suddenly you can't pay your mortgage. Suddenly you can't go out and, you know, do things that you want to do in terms of, you know, pay for college or whatnot. More problematic is that at 65, the American public does not have any stake in this matter. They're not engaged in it. They're increasingly aware that American troops are being sent overseas, and they look and say, you know, I'm anti-communist. I don't believe in communism in Corpus Christi. I don't believe in personal property. Does it mean you're going to send your sons or your relations overseas to go fight a war in Vietnam? That argument had not been made. If you go back to World War II, an essay question on World War II, that domestic, how does the United States demonstrate the good war? Before the war started, we've got the 4 freedoms in the Atlantic Charter. We're saying to the American public, this is what this war is about. We never do that, right? Because bringing the American public in means in a democracy you're going to get conflicting views. You know, I don't think that's necessarily a good idea, right? And I have here, remember the 1950s tension. I picked up the 1950s, we'll be coming back to the 50s after this. So there is a cultural kind of change that's going on regardless of the war. Youth culture, rock and roll, race relations, etc. All this is sort of bubbling to the surface. The war at home begins to split the Democratic Party between hawks and doves. Again, the terminology is always, it gets turned into, Fox chyrons or MSNBC chyrons or whatever. Hawks are not just simply kill them all, take their gas and whatever. Hawks are arguing that you use military power as a form of diplomacy, that it is a legitimate form of exerting national power. A dove is not opposed to that. A dove is not saying, oh, we'll never fight anywhere, we should just plant flowers and all that kind of stuff. A dove is saying you have to be very clear as to when and where you use that military power, right? A dove may say, for example, you don't have to invade Vietnam to put economic pressure on it. It may be the wrong war in the wrong place, or we have to wait, right? So there isn't this separation of, this black and white separation of saying, well, you're either for us or against, right? It isn't that simple. What it's arguing is that is Vietnam the right place to do that? And the Democratic Party, the dominant party of the United States during the 1960s, is going to start to split internally. And so if you like to see kind of conflicts result in political change, the Democrats are largely going to be the ones who are going to take the biggest blow as a result of Vietnam, right? They're in power, they get to take the brunt of this, right? This fear of political opposition is going to play a strong role in how Johnson behaves. And obviously in the 1960s, I've been stressing this when I've been showing the videos, where are the hippies, where are the hippies? The counterculture emerges late in the 1960s as a product of the modern civil rights movement. So the modern civil rights movement is effectively saying, why are we behaving this way internally? Why do we have these kind of racial designations? And it largely becomes a generational question. Old people, no, that's the way it's always been, that's the way it's always going to be. Young people, you're idiots, right? Okay, boomer, right? That kind of stuff. This tension is going to, we're going to talk about it when we get to the 1960s, this tension is going to be drawn into the war because of the Selective Service Act, the draft, right? This is not a volunteer army. This is somebody getting, in those days, a mail, a piece of letter. You are to report to your local recruiting agency and sign up because you're going to war. There were exemptions. If you were in college, you could get an exemption. If you were a parent, you could get an exemption. If you had bone spurs, you could get an exemption. Those people are wealthy. Those people have access to that. The war is going to be overwhelmingly 70 to 80% of the active military force in Vietnam are going to be people of color or minorities, right? So it's going to be a poor person's war. They're the ones who are going to fight it. So this is going to, again, kind of change the domestic interpretation. We don't see this war introduced as a good war. We see it introduced as a political war. Whenever you do that, you run into all kinds of domestic problems. And lastly, this civil rights issue is going to kind of plague the United States domestically. As we're going through a civil rights re-examination of what the Constitution means, it is very clear that you're looking at a non-white population in Vietnam being the opponent of the United States military. So all of this is sort of wrapping itself into it. The people who have to pay the price are whom? Certainly not the tax yet, the soldiers themselves. Right? And it's the same point I made in World War II, to focus on the people who fought this war. What did they say? What were their reactions? They're the ones who you should be empathetic towards, right? And in essence, the combat veterans are the ones who are going to feel this the most immediate and are going to break the most cleanly against the war internally. By the way, this image, that young man on the right is, according to the photographer, is going to be killed by mortar fire less than 20 minutes after that picture is taken, right? These are not engagements, small little engagements. These are hundreds of individuals, when the United States engages in direct conflict with the North Vietnamese army, you're talking about thousands of individuals engaged, and hundreds usually are going to be injured or killed as a result of this. The numbers are pretty obvious here, right? The more military forces that are in country, the more American deaths are going to result. Right? And I can't stress enough, by 68, 500,000 American combat forces are in tiny, tiny little Vietnam. It's almost twice what we had, more than twice what we had in the entire country of Iraq when we invaded in 2003. Right? So the idea somehow that we are not giving this war our full military focus is absolutely incorrect on multiple levels, right? So, you know, a lot of the defeatists, a lot of people, oh, well, we didn't really get to, yes, we did, right? Yeah.
If 500,000 were there in Vietnam, how many forces did we have at the time worldwide?
I don't know specifically, I would say probably 4 to 5 million overall, given the global nature of America's commitment. But the reality, John, I don't know.
Substantial amount.
Pretty substantial amount, yeah. It's still a draft army, so it's not a volunteer force, a fully volunteer force, that's going to change. So there's less of a professional military career, I'm gonna go to the military and yada yada. Most of these are conscripts. And by the way, in 1967, Westmoreland requested an additional 750,000 troops. The idea was to have 1.25 million American servicemen in a region basically the size of Texas. Right? That is not a minor inconvenience. These individuals are going to be facing this question: what am I here for? Why am I putting myself in this situation? What are the goals? Again, the Joint Chiefs are going to be clear after this. You don't have to go far. Again, if you know veterans, ask veterans, right? But these are one of many war letters home that are going to be recorded in regards to this. So, again, out of here.
Vietnam, 30 March 71. Dear Mom and all, don't worry, I didn't get another Purple Heart.
Another Purple Heart. Friend of mine is free.
My buddies are all dead. Out of our infantry company, 21 killed, 29 wounded, and 27 of us are left to talk about the 5 hours of hell we went through. It's too late to bitch, but the truth will not be told to the U.S. A lot of men are killed, but they tell you only half the number. I can't sleep good anywhere now. I'm trying to forget the horror of Sunday morning. Mom, I'm sick of this shit.
I can play dozens of these. These are letters home from service people who are there, in essence, trying to make sense of what it is that they're there to sacrifice for. The military finds itself in the politicized center of this, and by 1968, there is no answer coming, right? Again, military, like any institution that's got high bureaucracy, all kinds of acronyms. DAROS is a critical one for anyone sent overseas. Date eligible for return from overseas. Your DAROS is set, you have a number, and every day that number drops by 1. And the focus becomes, when you get within double digits, usually less than 100 days, you aren't gonna be interested in going out and fighting. Let the FNGs do that. Let these new people come in. You can figure out what that stands for, right? Let the new guys do it, right? There's going to be a focus on avoiding dangerous conflict. And you'll have new officers come in, second Louis and above, who are going to be rewarded for what? For active engagement. You're gonna have these new officers come in and go, come on everybody, let's get up and let's go take that hill. For what? For me to get shot, right? To be able to get you the next promotion? While most of the fragging, and it refers to a fragmentation grenade, is not gonna result in the death of American officers, it is taking place quite often. And it's sending a message, quit being so aggressive and sending us out into these issues. The Department of Defense, DoD, is reporting to the American public as late as 1968 that victory is right around the corner. Right? Just wait, we just need to send in another 500,000 troops. We just need another $2 billion. We just need another bomber. We just need more Agent Orange. Hang with us, right? When the Pentagon is reporting to the President of the United States that this is not going to turn the war one way or the other. So the public is hearing victory's right around the corner, there's light at the end of the tunnel, this thing is about, and they believe them, right? Why? Because Americans tend to, at this point in time, still trust authority figures. My president doesn't lie. My president's not gonna be impeached. My president, my generals are not gonna lie to us. All of this, here's where this credibility gap comes to a head in January 1968. Why January 68? The North Vietnamese, regular armies, uniforms, right? The North Vietnamese are going to stage a multiple location attack. Again, these aren't, these clips for some reason aren't running. What it is, this image right here is, the film clip is coming from the inside of the American embassy in Saigon, right? That's American soil. There's fighting in and amongst the American embassy in 1968. Now, the irony is that, we're 72 different towns, 245 districts. The United States is very quickly going to destroy this. The North Vietnamese made a poor choice in attacking heavily fortified American installations. They are going to, quote unquote, lose this engagement, the Tet Offensive. It was a poor military decision on the part of the North. But what it does is to strike hard into the lie of saying, victory is not right around the corner. We're not about, they're willing to fight this for as long as it takes. And we have no idea as to what's going on. Following the Tet Offensive, the American public starts talking about a credibility gap. And it's a plan, when we get back to the 60s, to talk about John Kennedy. When John Kennedy came into office, he argued the Republicans were soft on communism and it allowed a missile gap, right? That there weren't enough intercontinental ballistic missiles. And Kennedy's a real hardliner on that. The credibility gap is saying, in essence, the same thing is true now for the Democrats in regard to the Johnson administration, right? So it's a political blow because the American public is suddenly looking and saying, wait a minute, if victory's right around the corner, what the hell are we doing fighting on the American embassy soil, right? What's going on here? It's here where the first casualty, domestic casualty of the war, and again, you won't see any tears from me, is the Democratic Party. The party itself begins to splinter. Eugene McCarthy is going to run against the sitting president, Lyndon Johnson, come a close second in the primary in March of 1968. And what it does is convince Bobby Kennedy, somewhat opportunistically, to throw his hat in the ring as well. They are now challenging the sitting Democratic president of the United States, right? So Donald Trump is president as if another Republican steps forward in 2020 to run against Donald Trump, right? Biden's president is as if, who knows if he's gonna run for re-election, but someone says, no, he's not Democratic enough. The party begins to lose that unified voice. Why is that important? Because since 1932, the Democrats have been the unified party of the United States. Very much like as we're gonna see the Republicans do kind of following from this. It goes back to American politics. You have this weird kind of cycle in regards to it. Johnson himself recognizes the inevitability of this. And I'm always torn in terms of my sympathy for Johnson. You'll see the respect I pay this man when it comes to domestic policy. You want to know why we have civil rights laws in this world in this country is because of Lyndon Johnson, Texas president. And I'm sympathetic to the idea that he doesn't necessarily see foreign policy all that clearly. It's like me if I was to go cook, I don't know what I'm doing. I know how to barbecue. I know how to use a grill, right? That's about it. I don't know what I'm doing. Johnson, to his credit, recognizes that his own administration is fatally flawed as a result of the foreign policy engaged here. Johnson he says, I'm like a Texas mule in a hailstorm, right? And he always uses these Texas, I can't run, I can't hide, I can't make it stop, right? What Johnson does do is to send people over, his own administration, over to Vietnam to see the conditions on the ground. And when they return, effectively Johnson says, we can't win this war. And we are gonna stop bombing, and we are gonna stop sending more Americans over, and we are going to end this war before I leave office. And oh, by the way, I am not going to run for re-election. You can nominate me, I won't accept it. You can elect me president, I will not serve. I am going to take the political repercussions of this. How refreshing is that, right? Is that I'm the author of this, I'm gonna go down as a result of it. 68 Gallup poll shows that a majority of Americans want out, right? So quickly, 65 American troops were sent in, 68, the American public is like, whoa, this is the wrong war, wrong place, wrong time. Right? So it doesn't take a long time for the American public to recognize this in regards to this. Nixon, who was going to be running as a Republican, You know, again, we'll do a lot of comparisons between Nixon and the former guy. Nixon is going to reach out to the North Vietnamese and tell them not to negotiate. Right? We have the information. I mean, the FBI and the CIA both have been taping, you know, because of this concern. Nixon himself is going to say they're going to get a better deal if Nixon becomes president, and he's going to torpedo the peace efforts. Right? I mean, you know, you got Republican Senator Dirksen and Johnson. I'm reading their hand, Everett. This is treason, and I know it. Right? In essence, what you've got is the politics of America, and Republican Democrat are going to say it's more important for the Republicans to win the presidency than it is for this country to get out of this war. Right? What it does, in essence, is to create a delay in the war, and from 1968 to 1973, we are still fighting this war. More Americans are going to die after 1968 than died before as a result of this, when both political parties are convinced we want to get out of this war. That's the FUBAR of Vietnam. That's the tragedy of Vietnam. That's the thing that still kind of has a legacy in this country. Like having a burr under your saddle or whatever, something rocking your shoe. That element is what causes the kind of post-Vietnam War political machinations that are going on. Nixon does win. Nixon wins a razor-thin election in 1968. Johnson doesn't run, but his vice president does. Nixon promises to have peace and honor as a result of this. Yeah.
How long does it take for us to find out that Nixon did this before?
The initial information that was made available to historians was 25 years after the event. So the National Archives will release this information unless it's held as confidential 25 years after the event. The Kennedy tapes, we get the Kennedy assassination, there are still a few that are out there. But generally, the only reason that you would not release that is if someone was alive and they were compromised as a result of it. So if I snitched to the federal government in 1963 and I'm still alive and it would still have a negative repercussion on me, they would still redact that. Usually it's 25 years. Yeah, so it's not the time, unfortunately, right? Nixon is going to, and Nixon has a lot of credibility. Nixon was Eisenhower's vice president. Nixon ran against John Kennedy in 1960. He's well respected in terms of the United States American politics. He's been spending 8 years developing his links to the Republican Party. He's going to argue, in essence, that he has a plan to end this war. And what he does is, in essence, make an argument that we want peace, but we want peace on our terms. And Nixon is going to make an argument that says he is the best situated to do that, not Herbert Humphrey. What you see is Humphrey saying, we want out of this war at a 45-degree angle. Nixon is going to basically say, trust me, I'll manage it. Trust me, I'll figure out what's going on. Again, the American public, a clear majority now, not just a majority, want out. And make no mistakes, in '68, another 20,000 Americans are going to die in Vietnam, right? Because of politics, because of a politician saying, I don't want to lose California, I don't want to lose Maryland, right? And again, these are kind of issues that need to be laid here. Nixon's strategy is three-part, and it's very important to kind of recognize the groundwork for this. One of them is his own kind of diplomacy. I'll talk in detail about Richard Nixon. He is a somewhat paranoid individual. He doesn't trust people. He doesn't have a lot of friends. And so he has a very small group of people who do most of the heavy lifting. One of them is this national security advisor guy by the name of Henry Kissinger, who is still alive. Right? Kissinger is going to be sent on secret missions. Sounds kind of cool, right? But he wants to, in essence, start putting pressure on Vietnam, not only from the Soviet Union, who we do talk to, but also the People's Republic of China. The United States doesn't recognize the PRC in 1968, just like we didn't recognize Cuba for a long time, which means it's illegal to have direct conversations. You have to recognize, you have to have a consulate, you have to have a formal relations, right? So all of this is done in secret. And the fear that this information is going to get out is going to make Nixon quite paranoid. Right? So he is going to be, we've got to keep it secret, we've got to keep it hush-hush. His idea is, in essence, to use the Soviet Union and the People's Republic distrust of each other to kind of undermine the support that one or other is going to show to the people to Vietnam. So it's a complicated structure, but in essence what he's doing is using all of the international players and trying to force them to put pressure on Vietnam to slow down its assault on the South. Secondly, he's going to, in essence, make an argument that we need to avoid American involvement, right? Avoid having American troops fight this war, and what he calls it is Vietnamization. Start withdrawing active combat troops or minimizing their engagements in combat in Vietnam. And he ends the draft, right? So you're no longer, well, it ends the draft. There's a lottery system there. A couple of good friends of mine, they know that number, right? If you, in essence, what you would have is if you're in a district in South Texas, they would say, of this area, you're going to draft, let's say, 100 young men, and everyone is given a lottery number. Some of those 100 are gonna have bone spurs. Some of them are gonna have notes from, well, so-and-so, and I'm gonna get out of it. If you had a lottery number that was less than 100, in all likelihood, you were gonna get drafted. If you had a number that was 700, for example, you probably would, it's like jury selection, you probably wouldn't get chosen. So it is kind of, the idea of a general draft is going to be kind of mitigated, but there still is this notion of those who aren't necessarily there by force. And lastly, Nixon is going to kind of have this notion of a madman theory. What it means is that he wanted to keep the North Vietnamese unsure of Nixon's military strategy. There's an argument to be made for that, right? Of saying, you don't know when I pull out the nuclear weapons in this war. You don't know when I'm going to bomb Hanoi to the ground as a result of this. I may reach a point where I'm going to stop being in a mood to negotiate and simply turn to weapons of mass destruction. By December of '73, towards the ends of this, he is going to do that by sort of unleashing B-52 bombing raids on the north. These are indiscriminate. B-52s, these huge bombers, they drop their loads from 20,000 feet, right? So they're not like a not like a video game where you're strafing and all that kind of stuff. You can barely see the target. I mean, they obviously know which targets, but it is not a campaign of kind of look someone in their eye and fight them, because we're going to bomb them back to the Stone Age, right? Most of the POWs that existed at this point in time are going to come from this late stage of the Vietnam War. They're not from 63 or 65 or something like that. So Nixon has a strategy to get the Vietnamese to the negotiating table, but all you see from 68 to 73 are these internal problems, right? The My Lai massacre, why does that take place? Because these servicemen are put in a situation that allows them to crack, right? It doesn't mean that they're inherently, you put any human being in a situation like this, and you don't know what you're gonna get when you put them under pressure. In this case, what you get is the attack of a village and slaughtering of innocent women and children. Again, you can read them themselves, bragging spikes. The beginning of a domestic culture war starts to take root. So we'll pick this up afterwards. It's going to be, oh, you're soft on communism, you're whatever. It becomes politically expedient for politicians to use this distinction as some sort of meaningful political tool for them. The one thing you can be clear of is that by 1968, certainly 69, you no longer see a World War II, post-World War II America. That sense of agreement on everything and these big ideals and all that. We're back to good old America. We're back to the way we've been for most of our history. And that is that 50% think the other 50% are idiots, right? And that's the norm for America, right? Love it or hate it, that's the norm, right? It's like, World War II is unique in that, right? It's during this period of time when you see the campus unrest turning into instances like Kent State. Again, there was no National Guardsman that woke up that morning and said, I want to kill a college student. There was no college student that said, I woke up that morning and said, I want to kill a National Guardsman. What happens is that the war creates the environment for protests. These protests put high levels of stress on people. And in this case, at Kent State, it's an interesting story in and of itself. What you see are the National Guard felt threatened. What they do is start shooting into these protesters. The sad thing is, this kid right here who's shot and killed is not even protesting. Right? He's on his way to a class, right? And he's shot and killed. Suddenly the war's at home. Suddenly we're dying. Suddenly American civilians are dying as a result of this. The key break for multiple narratives, and I'm trying to finish up here, the key break for multiple narratives comes in June of '71. Right? So this guy right here, Daniel Ellsberg, is a reporter for Stars and Stripes. So he's a member of the Department of Defense. He's going to be in country for much of the war. He is going to then go back to the Pentagon and work in the Pentagon. While he's at the Pentagon, all of these memos about what's going on in Vietnam are crossing his desk. And what he's seeing is general after general or commander after commander saying, we can't win this thing. They were saying it in '63, and yet the politicians were saying something completely different. It's very much like the WikiLeaks or Julian Assange, in that area. What he does is to take those documents and steal them, right? And so it's an act of espionage, it's a breaking of security secrets. And he goes to the New York Times and says, listen, I've got this evidence here, which is basically showing that since the Eisenhower administration, every president has been lying to the American public about our engagement in Vietnam. And the New York Times, based on the First Amendment, says we can print it. It goes to the Supreme Court of the United States. It is a central, again, when you have politicians talking about the evil free press, you need to understand as a college student, you're not like everybody who's watching TV and just reacting. That is a core principle of what a democracy stands for. Someone can publish what you said, right? And they have the right to do that if you are a public official. The Supreme Court rules that the New York Times has those First Amendment rights. And what it does is to show the American public in black and white exactly what I've been talking about here. And that is that the planning for this was very clear. The ideas behind it were very clear. These military men are not going to be engaged in a war and just, oh, well, let's hope for the best. They're going to be looking at these contingencies. And what they found was an unwinnable war. A war where the United States was not going to be successful. There wasn't even an exit strategy. Right? So we're sending people over there without a sense of when do you say you won and can leave office. This is what McMaster is writing about. Trump's former national security advisor wrote about in a book when he was talking about dereliction of duty. Right? That it is the duty, regardless of whether or not you're going to lose your job, it is the duty of a military commander to step up and say, we're simply not going to push this out of priority. It does show a silver lining, and it's going to have long complications because what the Pentagon Papers release are dirt on the Eisenhower administration, dirt on the Kennedy administration, dirt on the Johnson administration. They released nothing about the Nixon administration. And as we're going to see, Richard Nixon is going to be, oh my God, we got to think, who knows what? Who has had access to this kind of information? All right. One more minute left in class, and I just want to kind of get to it. January of 1973, the United States agrees to an armistice. Just like World War I, an armistice means we're not saying who won and who lost. It doesn't have to be a victor or a loser here. We're just stopping a fight, and we are going to withdraw our troops. January of 1973, the United States reaches this armistice, and within the next basically 30 days, we withdraw all of our fighting forces very precipitously. Afghanistan looked a lot like Vietnam did in 1973. By 75, Saigon falls, and Vietnam was reunified as a communist country. All right, I'll stop there. Again, I'll be in my office if you get a specific question.